A very good afternoon to everybody who's joined us live on Facebook. As we inch closer to the end of 2020, and when we look back at the year that just went by, there are many words, many emotions that come to our mind. The pandemic has defined many things for us, and we live in a new normal now, the so called new normal. So it will be a great idea to discuss this in detail and to understand what is in store for us. It is a complete pleasure and honor for Gurgaon Moms and for me to be hosting this interaction with medical luminaries and country's foremost medical experts. We have with us Dr. Randeep Guleria, the director of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. He is also a member of the National Task Force on the Coronavirus Management in the country. Welcome, Doctor. Dr. Gagandeep Dr. Gagandeep Kang is a world-renowned vaccine researcher and virologist. She is one of India's most eminent medical scientists who played a critical role in the development of the indigenous rotavirus vaccine. When I was reading up about her yesterday, I was super thrilled to read this. In 2019, she also became the first Indian woman to be elected as a fellow of the Royal Society. An honor to have you with us, Doctor. I also have with me Dr. Chandrakant Lahariya, who is a leading public policy and health systems expert. His work focuses upon universal health coverage, primary healthcare, and strengthening of health systems. He is also the reason why we are here today. He is the reason why this book is here. He reached out to his co-authors. The title of the book is Till We Win. It's an everyday guide to protect yourself from COVID-19. And the book also has key tips for those who have recovered from COVID-19. It's a lovely chronicle of what came in the name of the pandemic and how the system reacted, how we as a community reacted to the whole thing. And it also has amazing tips. I think for me, my favorite are the FAQ tips, Doctor. I mean, they were like beautiful shots of information, very informative. I think in the age of the infodemic, as they call it, this book comes in extremely handy. So yes, thank you so much, Doctor, for coming up with this idea of putting together a much needed book. You've also mentioned how this book can be referred by your newborn, Asmara. So congratulations on your daughter. That one day she would get a sense of what the world was going through when she was just a fetus in her mom's stomach. But tell us, Doctor, what was the driving idea behind the book and who should read it and what can they expect out of this book?
So, Neela, it might
Want
help
to
if
start
you
with me?
tell us which one you
Whom
want
you are
to
addressing?
direct the question to.
Oh, okay. This is to Dr. Chandrakant. I'm
So
sorry.
thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. So when we were in the beginning of the pandemic, we realized, all three of us, in different places and different capacities, we realized that there is a lot of information which is not correct and which is not authentic going on around. And this was creating a lot of panic and a lot of stigma and discrimination. So at our workplace, wherever we were, we realized and recognized these challenges. So 3 months down the lane, when we noticed that this was causing a lot of problem and challenges, it was also widely known that pandemics can be fought by the people. And if people need to be engaged in the fight against pandemic, then they need to be provided the right kind of information which they can use effectively. So around mid of May or late May 2020, three of us together decided that we need to share some of the information with the people which they can use to go on or fight this pandemic. So we have written this book with one purpose of providing authentic information to the people which they can use throughout the pandemic as long as we are in the pandemic. But we have written for other purpose also. The second purpose is that we wanted to empower people with the variety of information on what viruses are, why pandemics happen, and why people need to wash their hands, why face masks need to be worn. The idea or the reason is that it is easy to say that one should do hand washing, one should wear face mask or physical distancing. but it requires compliance and adherence from everybody. And that compliance cannot come if we simply tell that they need to do this thing. This compliance comes when people know why they need to do this thing. So we wanted to empower people with the why of what need to be done. And that's why this book is. There are many other purposes in which we would talk about, but another thing is that we all believe that health is a combined responsibility of government, people, policymaker, and health experts. And each of the citizen can play a role in strengthening India's healthcare system. For example, if as a housewife or a family member knows that what is the responsibility of government, who is responsible for delivering a particular type of service, then those citizens can hold their local representative accountable. And that kind of accountability is key in improving health system of the country. So there are many things which we have elaborated, but to summarize, one is that we wanted to empower citizens with the information to live through this pandemic. We wanted to answer the common questions which have been asked, but we at the macro level, we wanted to bring everybody, bring some accountability in health system to strengthen India's healthcare system. So these were some of the ideas, and more details are given in the book. But I definitely would like to invite Dr. Guleria and Dr. Kang if they want to add something to this.
I think I have a lot of questions for them as well. But yes, doctor, this is in fact a fabulous, brilliant effort. And I think it's a must have handbook for every one of you to have it in our houses. Dr. Gagandeep, there is a dry run for COVID vaccine happening today as we speak. So by when can we expect a safe and effective vaccine? Because all of us are looking forward. And when is it going to happen in India? What is the timeline that we are looking at? Um, so please tell us, elaborate.
I really don't think we have very long to wait. It's a question of days rather than weeks or months that we will be thinking about the first vaccine being rolled out in India. But I think the most important thing to emphasize is that at least initially doses will be limited. And when doses are limited, it's important that the doses reach prioritized populations first. And that's really healthcare workers and essential frontline workers. So, one thing that people who worry about vaccines should be thinking about is the fact that actually we've done a pretty good job of handling the pandemic so far without a vaccine. So, to think about us managing for a few more months using what we have already internalized as important interventions is not going to be as much of a hardship as it is in many other parts of the world that have been much worse hit than us. Everywhere else in the world, things have begun to trend upwards, whereas we are still in a very reasonable place in India. So
Right.
vaccines will come, they will come soon, but don't worry if you don't get a vaccine tomorrow. There are things we can do to prevent infections.
True, doctor. And thank you for the reassurance and the hopeful answer. But we also keep hearing about some of the allergic reactions in some cases abroad. And the fact that the vaccine was developed in such a short period also makes some of us uncomfortable with the news items that come out. So, for all those who are concerned about the safety and security about taking this vaccine, what are your comments or observations on that, Dr. Gagandeep?
I think the first thing to emphasize is that actually there have been no shortcuts to developing this vaccine. What we have done differently in order to develop the vaccines really fast is solved every problem that money could solve. So usually when you develop a vaccine, you do preclinical testing, then you move into phase one, you have to find the resources, you have to set up the studies. You're always worried about failure because really only about 7% of all vaccines that start out as vaccine candidates finally result in a safe and efficacious vaccine. In this case, what we've done is tried lots and lots and lots of different candidates, and we've tried them with studies going on in parallel instead of in sequence. So not one followed by the other, but different phases of testing being done together. The other thing is that we've gone big. So usually where you could have done a vaccine with 10,000 people followed up for a year, we've done it with 30,000 people followed for 3 or 4 months. So in terms of generating data for efficacy and data for safety, everything, the kinds of numbers you would see in a normal clinical trial are being seen here. Now, in terms of safety, I think one thing is very important to remember is that with safety, we look at risk. What is the risk of a side effect? Now, if a risk is 1 in 100 people, it will be picked up in clinical trials. If it's 1 in 1,000 people, there also in phase 3 clinical trials, you will identify it. If it's 1 in 10,000 people, maybe you'll find it in a clinical trial. If it's 1 in 50,000 or 1 in 100,000, you won't find that in a clinical trial. So if you look at the allergic reactions that we are seeing with the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, they seem to be occurring somewhere in 1 in 40,000 vaccinated individuals. So these are not risks that could have been detected in any kind of clinical trial. And the suspect that we have is polyethylene glycol, which is present in many other products that we use in daily life, but we don't usually inject it. So now that it has been identified, we can think about modifying vaccine composition. It's also important to remember that the allergic reactions that have been seen have been looked after very quickly, because it is a requirement that everybody who receives the vaccine has to wait for half an hour after the vaccine is taken, so that if an allergic reaction is going to manifest itself, it will do that while the person is waiting. And teams have been trained in how to look after those individuals. That's why everybody who's had the allergic reaction has also recovered. And in terms of when the vaccines are used, one thing that the government has emphasized greatly is the strengthening of the national adverse events following immunization surveillance program. Many people don't even know that it exists, but its entire purpose is to monitor the safety of vaccines when they are in routine use. And that has been strengthened significantly with district, state, and national level structures. So, one thing that's very reassuring is because the spotlight is on these vaccines, the systems are being built for monitoring the use and the safety of these vaccines.
That is great to hear, Doctor. It is very reassuring to know that no compromise has been made, and uh, intense processes have been put in place, and there's a lot of focus on getting the vaccine ready for all of us. Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Randeep, all of us are following closely about the new mutant strain in UK and South Africa. uh, it's there in the news and it's on the top of our minds, because just when we are seeing a downward trend, now we hear about this. How concerned should we be? Are the vaccines that are to be administered, will they be effective against the new strain that has come?
So mutations are known to happen with all viruses, and so too with the COVID-19. Coronaviruses also tend to mutate, possibly less frequently than what we see with influenza. And this is not something which is new. This mutation, there are mutations which have been going on for quite some time as far as this virus is concerned. As a matter of fact, if you were to compare this with the original virus which came out of Wuhan, there are mutations which have happened over the last 10 months as far as the virus is concerned. The reason why this has been a red flag is that based on observational data in southeast England, London, and the area of Kent, when they looked at the epidemiological data along with the increasing number of cases which were being infected by this strain, they found that there was a spike in the number of cases, suggesting that this was more infectious, and therefore it could be one of the causes of an increase in the number of cases in that area. However, they did not find any increase in hospitalizations or any increase in mortality. Based on modeling data, they R naught was calculated to be, which is means if one person has a disease, how many more can he infect? That had gone up by zero point 0.4, and based on modeling data, it was felt that this is 70% more infectious. Now, there can be other confounders also because this was the festive season and people are going out, they're crowding, especially the younger generation. And because of that, the number of cases could also have gone up. But as abundant precaution, it was very important that we understand that there is a strain which has mutated and has mutated to the extent that it may be more infectious. And therefore, COVID appropriate behavior becomes all the more important. Because if we are able to maintain that, wear masks whenever we go out, have physical distancing, wash our hands, avoid crowded areas, then this strain will not be able to spread in the community and we will be able to prevent the surge in the number of cases which have been noticed in UK and also in parts of Europe. So I think it's important for us to understand that for individuals, it's important that COVID appropriate behavior becomes all the more important now. At the same time, from the government point of view, there is a lot of things that have been put in place in terms of a network to try and pick up whether this mutant is there by having labs which will do the gene sequencing and see whether people who are coming from UK, and in case there is an increase in number of cases in some area, then samples can be taken from there from patients who are positive to see whether this mutation is happening there, and a plan of action is in place. Regarding the vaccine, vaccines act on multiple sites and they cause what we call neutralizing antibodies and also a T cell response. So although there is some mutation which has been seen in this strain at what is known as the spike protein, which is the target antigen used for vaccine production, it's unlikely as of now that it will have a major effect as far as the current vaccines which are coming out are concerned. But having said that, it's very important for us to observe closely, look at the data, and if need be, then take a call whether there needs to be any change as far as the vaccine is concerned. As of now, that doesn't seem to be the case, and therefore the vaccines which are being rolled out and which are being uh, used abroad will be effective against this strain which has emerged as a part of mutation.
But Dr. Randeep, the current test that we do, the regular test for COVID, will that tell what strain it is? Will that help to detect what strain it is?
So the
No, it,
current, which is the RT-PCR test, will not do that. It will tell you whether you're positive or not. It will not. The bigger concern was, will this test miss out a person who has had a change in as far as the strain is concerned?
Okay.
In India, we look for two genes as far as the virus is concerned, and therefore it's very this mutation will not be missed as far as the current testing is concerned. But you need more advanced testing. You need what we call gene sequencing to be able to really pick up whether mutation has occurred to the extent that we are seeing, and that needs to be done in more sophisticated labs. And that is why a limited number of samples are tested to see whether that mutation is there. Every sample need not be tested to look for mutation. You will take a representative sample, and this is what was done in the UK. They picked it up on the 20th of September by what their surveillance was being done. It was not that they tested every sample and it came up that it was positive. So
Got
we
it.
need to have a good surveillance network in our country for looking at mutations which occur, and that is being done by the government in setting up various laboratories which can do gene sequencing as far as these samples are concerned.
Got it. Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Chandrakant, so when can India truly become COVID free? Will we be able to administer the vaccine to every person in the country? I think Dr. Gagandeep gave us uh, a very realistic answer in the beginning as well, that all of us will have to wait. But even if it takes time, will it reach every person in the country? So obviously, I'm referring to the availability and the logistics part of it as well, because I understand that there is a lot of requirements to take the vaccine safely to the different locations as well. So the country has a very large population, and unless we get to zero cases, we really aren't COVID free. What are your comments on that, Doctor?
So I'm not sure we would, at least in near future, be able to use word COVID free. However, there are two parts of it. One is that when the world will be free from the pandemic, and when the pandemic will be over. So that is a question, I guess, sometimes in the near future, when vaccines or more than one vaccines are available, vaccine would reach to a reasonable proportion of population, and the cases started coming down across the world. So that point of time, pandemic would be declared over, but that would be done by international organizations, and that's a standard process for that. So we really don't know when this pandemic would be over, but it can be expected that by toward the end second half of next year, we can hope that hopefully this pandemic would be over. However, as we know from the historical perspective, that once a virus enters in a setting and community, the viruses are likely to stay for a longer period. So while pandemic could be over a certain point of time, but we all and many probably have to live with the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 for a far longer period, which means two things. One, that even when pandemic would be over, the virus would be around, and many things would have changed, and we continue to follow some of the behavior, COVID appropriate behavior. And all these things are in the future, and no one can certainly answer these questions. But we know one thing for sure, that pandemic would be over one day. When that would happen, we cannot answer with certainty. The SARS-CoV-2, the virus which caused COVID-19, would be around for little longer, at least a few years, and the infection rate or the new cases at the zero, we really don't know, and we hope that happens, but that is unlikely to happen. Coming to the third part, the vaccine related aspect, we know that a certain proportion of population need to be vaccinated before the pandemic would be over. However, as long as the virus would be around and how it is unfolding in the setting and community, the vaccination drive need to be continued. There are other unanswered questions, such as how long the protection will be provided by the vaccines which will be administered. We don't know what would be the availability or quantity of vaccine available for different settings. So when different set of population, or when a particular proportion of population can be vaccinated, we really don't know. There are many unanswered questions. We need to understand that we have to live with this virus for some really long period, and we need to follow COVID appropriate behavior. What need to be remembered, that when there were number of cases which were really high, the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 was around. When the cases had come down, the virus is still around. Even when pandemic would be over, virus would be uh, still around. So we need to follow these COVID appropriate behavior for a fairly long period. And vaccines will be our helping guiding tool, but vaccine availability of vaccine will not mean that we can drop our guards on COVID appropriate behavior.
Okay, so that prompts another question. Dr. Randeep, so after the vaccine, can a person go back to a lifestyle like the pre-COVID days? I mean, because I did hear Dr. Chandrakant say that we cannot let our guards down. But then how does the vaccine change our lifestyle? Because we are in a new normal these days. Uh, can we, will masks still be important to wear even after that? And recently, a WHO expert has also mentioned that vaccines do not equal zero COVID. So my question comes from that, doctor.
I think whenever we talk about vaccine, it's important to understand what type of protection does the vaccine give. Is the vaccine going to give us total immunity, that is, we don't get COVID at all? Or is it going to really say that we get the infection, but we don't get severe disease? You get exposure, you get a mild fever, cold, but you don't have serious illness in the form of a pneumonia requiring hospitalization or going to ICU or dying because of COVID. Now, if that happens, the vaccine protects you from getting severe illness, but you get a mild illness, you are still infectious, and you could still give the infection to those who are susceptible. Therefore, even after vaccination, it is useful to have COVID appropriate behavior. That is first thing, because it may give you protection from getting severe illness and dying because of COVID, but you may still get a mild illness. So there are some vaccine based on the trial which suggests that they may give protection even to people who are asymptomatic, but we need more data before we can say that vaccines will give you no illness at all or no disease at all, no infection at all. The other important thing to understand is that the duration of protection of a vaccine, we're still trying to find out how long does the immunity last, and do are we protected for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. So because of all of this, I think it would be important for us to have COVID appropriate behavior even subsequently, but our life will be more easier in terms of being able to now more freely go out, whether it be a cinema hall, whether it be a restaurant, whether it be traveling. The chance of infection will have come down significantly because there would be significant number of people who will have immunity either because of having the infection or because of vaccination, and therefore the chain of transmission, which is very strong right now, would not be there. So in terms of people having a high risk of getting infection in terms of travel, it will be much more easier. But having said all of that, it would be worthwhile to still have your mask on, do hand washing, but not with the type of fear that we have nowadays, that especially as far as the older age group of people with comorbidities are concerned. Once they are vaccinated, it will be safer for them to go out to the market or to a shopping mall or even travel to see family and friend without having that fear that they can get the infection. But they should have appropriate behavior in terms of protecting themselves.
I think being fearless itself will be a huge relief for many of us. Dr. Gagandeep, we keep hearing about so many vaccines. I mean, so many companies producing different vaccines. Is it possible that one can be more effective than the other, or one is more superior than the other? Uh, what is your response?
At the moment, we really have only two vaccines, and both of them are mRNA vaccines. We have the prospect of a viral vectored vaccine in the near future. And we've seen different efficacy results from those. But I think the important thing to recognize is that the trials are not head to head comparisons. The mRNA vaccines were both tested in the US using very, very similar protocols. So, in terms of the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, the results that we are seeing came from similar testing strategies. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has not come from a similar strategy. That study was done in the UK and in Brazil. It had many more groups than were included for the Moderna and the Pfizer trials, 12 groups in all, in fact. So when you have a study that has a very different study design, then all you can really say is, did the study meet its primary endpoint? Did it achieve what it was trying to achieve? And in this case, what we were looking for was an efficacy that was greater than 50%. All three vaccines that have reported data, and Gamaleya, which reported it on a much smaller number, have told us that they are well above the 50% bar. I think if we need a more head to head comparison, we will need to wait for the AstraZeneca data from the US, where their study design is very similar to the design that has been used for Pfizer and for Moderna. Even then, not a perfect answer because the trial is being done at different stages of the pandemic, but at least a closer comparison. So sorry to not be able to say this is a ranking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Right.
but we will need to wait and see.
Right. So another question is, the study on progression of COVID-19 pandemic in India, the government appointed panel of which you've also been part of, Dr. Gagandeep. Uh, It says India has reached the coronavirus peak in late September. Crisis likely to end by February end. Is that true? In what stage of the pandemic are we? Can we safely rule out another wave? Can we say is the worst over?
A model is a model. And this study was a modeling study based on the available data, and not just based on the available data, but based on data that was available to the public, not data that was held by the government. So I think it's very important to lay out the caveats of this and to state that, models are built to give you an understanding of why things happened the way they happened and to potentially make predictions for the future. It's said of mathematical models that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I think with this particular model, we hope that it's a useful model and that its predictions are accurate. What will tell us whether things are likely to be quieter by February is better sero survey data combined with clinical and testing data. Unfortunately, we have not been able to get all the components of this together so far,
Mhm.
and I hope that that will happen in the future.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Chandrakant, in this context, we also kept hearing about herd immunity. So, what is the percentage of people who need to be immune against COVID-19 in order to achieve herd immunity? And your views on herd immunity versus vaccine in the COVID context?
So, from the very beginning of the pandemic, rather from June onward, a lot of discussion happened around herd immunity. There are a few things which we need to understand before we go into the herd immunity. One, for new viruses and new diseases and pandemics, the concept of herd immunity has not worked that well or not useful. That's one. Second, the concept of herd immunity is more useful and have always been used practically with the availability of vaccines. So without vaccines, there is a limited utility of the herd immunity. It remains a theoretical concept. Now, when this herd immunity discussion started, we know that there are different numbers which had been put around, from 43% of the total population developing infection or being vaccinated and then being immune to 70%. However, we also need to understand that, for example, in India, the two national sero survey has been conducted. First one was done in April and May 2020, and it was found that only 0.7% of the total sample was protected or developed some form of antibody. The subsequent second national sero survey was done in August and September, and that survey found that only 7% of the total sample had developed any form of immunity. So what it conveys clearly, that no matter what is the threshold, by the natural course of infection, the threshold of herd immunity cannot be achieved. So that idea is not something which can be emulated for pandemic. You reach seven with so many infections around, and we also know that for every confirmed laboratory confirmed case, there were around 20 additional cases for each case who were asymptomatic and not detected. So with so many of cases around, if only 7% of the population had antibody, if we follow that path and route, that is definitely dangerous and not appropriate path, because it will burden the hospitals and healthcare system. So to coming to the initial point, that concept of herd immunity is not useful, not practiced in the pandemics and novel viruses. Now, of course, the idea of herd immunity, that a particular proportion of population should develop some form of immunity, either through natural infection or vaccine, and then the rate of transmission declines, and then the new infection will be slowing down. With the availability of vaccine, we know that we will be moving faster and population will be developing immunity faster through the vaccination process. But that process is also going to be slow because we know that by mid of next year, around 20% of the population is being targeted for vaccination. But those are the population which are really high risk. Dr. Guleria already explained that we need to protect those population which are higher risk, and so reduce the mortality and severity, and at the same time reduce the burden on the hospital. To conclude this point, that probably herd immunity is a theoretical concept. It's useful in the long course on existing diseases, but not for the pandemic. Vaccines will help in developing an immunity in those individuals who are susceptible, and specifically vaccines would be targeted for those who are at higher risk, so will be useful. Uh, we cannot say that what is the threshold and when we will reach that, but vaccines will help. And with the currently slowing down on infection and vaccines being up on the horizon, we can hope that there would be some respite.
Got it. Dr. Randeep, the fact in the news, at least for the last few days, we've been seeing the fact that we are seeing a consistent downward trend in the number of cases. We are also reading and hearing about vaccine, and this gives us a lot of relief. But as a community, what are the red flags that we need to watch out for so we know that we're not slipping and we still have our guards up?
So I think as a country, we are in a very good position right now, much better than many countries in the Western world. If you look at how things are panning out in Europe, in UK, and in the US. But the challenge is to maintain this downward trend and not do anything to sort of disturb it for the next few weeks. Because if we're able to do it and we get over the winter months and we also have a vaccine which starts coming early next year, the combination of all of this will actually help us in keeping our cases down and therefore decreasing mortality, decreasing hospitalization, and being able to get the economy back on track and people being able to sort of come to life which is closer to normal. The challenge is that we need to first make sure that we all continue to have take what we call the non-pharmacological measures to prevent the spread of infection, which is the mask wearing, the hand washing, and the physical distancing. And at the same time, keep a close observation for any cluster which is developing, increase in number of cases. So the red flags basically are if you find that in your area suddenly a large number of people are coming out to be positive or having symptoms which are suggestive of COVID-19. That means there is a cluster that's developing there, and there is something which is out of the ordinary because the number of cases are coming down all over the country. So that is something that needs to be done, and that surveillance is already on. It's even more important now because of the fact that we have just discussed that there is some degree of mutation which has occurred in COVID-19, which makes it more infectious. And therefore, we need to be extra cautious that we are not having a development of a cluster or increasing number of cases in some part of our country. Secondly, of course, if you have symptoms or you have symptoms which are suggestive of COVID 19, it's important for us not to take it lightly. Very often, we have people who argue that I have fever, cough, cold. If I go and get myself tested and it turns out that I'm positive, I will be isolated. My family members will be troubled, and therefore, I should not get myself tested until I really am very sick. That has multiple disadvantages. One is that you are delaying your treatment to a stage when it can be life threatening. Secondly, you are exposing a large number of your own near and dear ones and friends who will get the infection, and many of them may have comorbidities and may therefore have a more serious illness, unlike what you may have. Therefore, I would still say that as we see a decline in number of cases, it's not that it's zero, it's still significant. And therefore, if you have symptoms, don't be scared of getting yourself tested. Get yourself tested to protect yourself and your near and dear ones. And at the same time, have COVID appropriate behavior when you go out. Try and see that others do that also, so that we are able to sort of sustain the success that we've had. After 10 months, we now have a very nice downward trend. The number of cases have come down. We saw this huge spike during after the festive season, and now we've been able to control that. The challenge is that citizens and everyone should understand their responsibility in maintaining this downward trend. Very often you see people feel that now cases are less, I can go out without wearing a mask, I can have parties, and we can have a new year party, we can all get together. That is an event which can be what we call a super spreading event. So
Hmm.
those are things that we still need to avoid, because we need to sort of continue and build on the gains that we've had over the last few months, and maintain it till we have a sufficient number of people who are vaccinated, and then we will be in a very comfortable position. So I think that is very, very important.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Gagandeep, we are now speaking to a community of moms, Gurgaon moms. So one of our primary concern is our children and their safety. And some of the schools are slowly opening in the country. So in your opinion, is that safe? With vaccine around the corner, do you think we should wait, or are our children ready to start going to school?
This is always a difficult question to answer. One thing we need to understand is that children are probably at the least risk of having severe disease, and young children in particular don't transmit as much as teenagers and young adults do.
Hmm.
So, in terms of a public health issue, sending children to school is not, would be one of the activities that would be high up there for safe activities to conduct. If we look at what's happening in Europe, a lot of schools have stayed open through the entire pandemic, and in many places in the world, schools are staying open, particularly for the younger children. The older children are the ones who transmit more. The older teenagers are still in a virtual mode as much as possible. And this is really balancing risk and benefit in terms of getting an appropriate education, the right kind of stimulus for cognitive development, as well as trying to control public health as much as possible. There is very good guidance available on how to reopen schools, what to look for in a school that is planning to reopen. What are the kinds of questions that parents should be asking to ensure that the school is following all the right principles for its activities? So something like sports.
Hmm.
Should children play?
Right.
Well, obviously, play is important for children, but what should they be playing? Sport, perhaps like rugby, is not going to be the best choice because there's so much physical contact involved. But tennis or badminton or table tennis are good because they allow you to play while still staying at a distance. Thinking about running, these are good activities that children can participate in. There are also guidance available now for playgrounds and the kind of approach you need to take, how many children should be in a playground at a time, and what you need to do in order to sanitize after playgrounds have been opened. I think teachers being on the priority list for vaccination is a very important feature of how our government is thinking about reopening of schools. I think there is a recognition that while well off children in general have been able to address a lot of schooling issues by online schooling, that's not something that has been feasible for all parts of our society. So, therefore, thinking through how to function for the future
Hmm.
is important, but I think very important to remember that children are least at risk, but it doesn't mean that you ignore all precautions.
Yeah.
Hard to decide how to balance this.
Yeah, it is. It is, Doctor. Yeah, so this year has been a lot to a lot of us, but I think it's been a lot of pressure for the medical fraternity. You've been trying to keep us safe. You've been trying to save and saving many of our near and dear ones. Uh, and thank you so much for taking the time and coming here and explaining everything in detail so patiently. But before we leave, and also thank you so much for the reassuring and hopeful answers. Where you've clearly mentioned, yes, we're in a good space right now, but move forward with caution because we're still not out of it. That message came out loud and clear from each one of you. But before we leave, let's leave on a high note as we move towards 2021. So I would love to ask each one of you. Please share how you're planning to celebrate your New Year's and what is your hope and prayer for 2021. And also share your message for the community, please. We'll start with Dr. Chandrakant.
So I would start with the two other things, so messages here. One is that this year had been a challenging one, but this has provided a lot many opportunities to reflect and think about. So coming to the about the book, I would say that this year one of the key messages our book has, but I would say that we have understood and citizens have understood little better that medical care and healthcare are two totally different things. The medical care which we often focuses upon is about care of sick people, but the pandemic has brought our attention that how preventive and promotive health can help us staying healthy. So if we can carry this forward message as an individual level, at individual level, that preventive and promotive health, we need to adhere to the way we followed COVID appropriate behavior. If we can follow the messages for healthy eating, regular physical activity, we can prevent non-communicable diseases also. So healthcare, we should bring attention. The second message I want to bring is that often we or a common citizen and family members think that healthcare is a very technical area. Should be left to the doctors or tech policymakers. But I believe that a citizen have a very important role in strengthening healthcare system in any country or any setup. For example, if as a housewife or family member, if you know what is the responsibility of a local counselor, or who knows that some of you might become a counselor or elected representative one day and in the policy making situation. So it's important for each one of us to know about how healthcare are delivered, who are responsible. And we have a chapter in our book which is about strengthening India's healthcare system. Some people might skip that chapter thinking that this is about healthcare, it is for policymaker. But I personally believe that every citizen one day will get an opportunity to transform India's healthcare system, and we can start reading with this book. So coming to the final part, how I want to celebrate, this 31st December will be my daughter's fourth monthly birthday. So we will enter in the new year celebrating my daughter's birthday with our family, and really hope that next year will be healthier, safer for everyone.
Congratulations once again, Doctor. And like you beautifully said, each one of us can voice and play a role in the healthcare system, in improving the healthcare system. Beautifully said. Dr. Gagandeep, would love to hear your New Year plans and your message for the community.
Um, my New Year plans, I've actually got 4 back-to-back sessions with school and college students online, which are going to be starting early in the afternoon and going well into the evening.
Okay.
And so that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but anyway, worth doing. So I think by the time I'm done with them, I'll be exhausted and go to sleep. But I think the message for me for 2021 is I've always been optimistic. I've always been optimistic about science and technology in particular. And vaccine science has outdone itself in this past year. I thought when at the beginning of the pandemic, I said it'll take us 12 to 18 months to make a vaccine, I was being unreasonably optimistic. Now I'm predicting the next pandemic that comes, we'll make the vaccine in 6 months.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Love the optimism, doctor. We all need that. And I think that is what helped us sail through the pandemic as well, the hope. So thank you so much for that hopeful message. Dr. Randeep.
Thank you. I'd start by really wishing the entire Gurgaon moms a very, very happy, healthy new year.
Thank you.
My good wishes to all of you. This year has been very, very challenging for all of us, but it has really shown how, as a country and how, as every citizen, if they come together, we can be resilient and we can really find opportunities. And many individuals turn this pandemic into an opportunity in terms of whether it be uh, helping the healthcare system or being able to support people who had problems because of the pandemic. Now, as the new year comes and we will have light at the end of the tunnel, so to say, in 2021, with the decline in number of cases, with vaccination being rolled out in India and globally, I think it's important for us not to forget the lessons that we've learned in 2020. And as has already been said, the importance of public health, the importance of preventive medicine, and how we can actually decrease or prevent a lot of diseases, whether it be infectious diseases or non infectious diseases, by just good lifestyle modification and by maintaining a good hygiene. And that, I think, is something that we should continue to build on. And we should not forget the lessons that we learned during the pandemic once we move out of the pandemic. So, a very, very happy new year to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the New Year wishes, Doctor. Before we sign off, I would like to remind every member who's logged in, do get your copy of Till We Win. It's a beautiful handbook. It's a very informative and helpful handbook that every household should have and can go through for all information with regards to COVID. Thank you so much once again, doctors, for taking out the time. Thank you. And very happy New Year to each one of you. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Neela, and all the best
Thank,
for 2021 to all of you.
thank you. Thank you so much, doctor.